London, April 12, 1976. Cold rain drifted across Kensington. Crowds moved toward the Royal Albert Hall. No one noticed the cellist watching from the shadows. His orchestra was scheduled to perform at 20 well. His real assignment began long before that. Under the name Arya 47, Mossad had embedded him inside the London Symphony Orchestra to confirm the location of a European militant coordinator who had slipped through every other surveillance net. The paradox was simple. He was an artist trained to disappear in plain sight, relying on music to mask intelligence work. To the public, this night offered culture and quiet refinement. To the Israeli officers who planned the mission, it offered a rare alignment of timing, geography, and cover. An improbable window that might not open again. What the militants across the street did not know was that the concert's first downbeat would double as an operational trigger. The stakes were defined in one directive. Operation Silent Arya would begin when the orchestra played its first note. Yonatan Halevi entered the world on 9 February 1948 in Haifa, a city still shaping its identity after the British Mandate. His early life was unremarkable by historical standards. Small apartment, 2 siblings, a mother who taught literature, and a father who worked the night shift at the port. What set him apart emerged at age 6, when an uncle placed a cello in his hands. By 8, he showed rare discipline. Long practice sessions, precise posture, and a calmness not seen in most children. His instructors described him as methodical in a way that suggested an adult mind in a child's body. A single event redirected his trajectory. At 19, while traveling through Athens for a youth competition, he survived a bombing at a waterfront hotel during a regional conflict. He pulled 2 travelers from the damaged lobby before first responders arrived. According to a later psychological review, the experience produced purpose-related hypervigilance, a sustained alertness tied to meaning, not fear. By age 20, Halevi had won a national cello competition and developed an ability that mattered far more to intelligence services than his musical skill. He noticed what others dismissed. His value lay in that trait. From the start, handlers understood that the most dangerous operatives were not always those with weapons training, but those who could remain invisible while observing others. Associates remembered him as steady, soft-spoken, and never impulsive. He processed details without showing effort, maintaining eye contact while cataloging a room's layout, exits, and movement patterns. This orientation, paired with the natural mobility of a performing musician, made him a rare strategic asset. He could cross borders without scrutiny, travel through diplomatic zones without raising alarms, and operate inside environments where formal intelligence officers would trigger automatic monitoring. By late 1975, Israeli intelligence had tracked the expansion of a Palestinian militant coordination network operating across Western Europe. Targets included diplomats, commercial offices, and cultural attachés. Patterns pointed increasingly toward London as a meeting and planning hub. Intelligence directorates issued internal assessments rating the network as a persistent operational threat. By January 1976, analysts concluded that conventional surveillance methods were no longer producing usable access. The authorization to pursue non-traditional channels was issued on 2 February 1976. The doctrine shaping this decision was known internally as indirect penetration. The logic behind it was direct. When a target environment is too sensitive for traditional operatives, place collectors in roles that authorities expect and trust. Cultural, academic, and economic channels were considered low-friction entry points. The London Symphony Orchestra fit that definition. Foreign musicians, instrument technicians, and touring staff were common in the city's musical circuit, and none fit the profile of foreign intelligence personnel. The operation planners concluded that embedding within this legitimate structure would produce movement patterns and proximity that ordinary covert teams could not achieve. Several concrete obstacles made this approach look nearly impossible. First, British counterintelligence maintained heightened awareness of foreign operatives due to Cold War tensions. Any misstep could trigger diplomatic fallout. Second, the militant coordinator had already survived 2 surveillance attempts in continental Europe and was believed to be alert to classic monitoring techniques. Third, the operational sites in London were scattered, and the target changed locations frequently, reducing the utility of stationary surveillance posts. Despite these challenges, planners identified one opportunity. The orchestra's spring tour schedule aligned with several neighborhoods of interest, including Kensington and Belgravia. Within 8 weeks, all elements would be in position. But first, the human dimension had to be resolved. Halevi's agreement to participate emerged from a quiet conversation in a rehearsal studio in Tel Aviv. According to an internal account, he listened without interrupting, then asked for only one clarification: whether the mission risked harming civilians. When assured that the objective involved a non-invasive identity confirmation, he accepted. To him, the request aligned with the sense of purpose he carried since the Athens bombing. But acceptance is not the same as ease. During the mission's early stages, he experienced what field psychologists call legend drift, the moment when a fabricated role begins to overshadow one's original identity. This occurred during a rehearsal in early March 1976, when he found himself reacting more as Ariel 47 than as Yonatan Halevi. A stagehand knocked over a stand of sheet music, producing a loud metallic crash. Several musicians flinched, but Halevi immediately scanned the room for exit routes and potential threats. Later, he realized he had evaluated the event with an operative's mindset, not a performer's. In the post-operation debrief, analysts noted that this blurring occurred because his cover identity was too close to his authentic self. The mission continued, but the psychological separation he once felt began to tighten. The target of the operation carried a separate but equally human trace. Intercepted communications from 24 February 1976, routed through an academic contact in Marseille, revealed the coordinator discussing the health of his younger sister, who had recently undergone surgery. Analysts noted no operational relevance in the exchange. The tone was restrained, almost formal, but one detail stood out. He asked repeatedly whether she was well enough to hear music again. When his network later suffered disruptions tied indirectly to Operation Silent Arya, that recovered message formed one of the rare reminders that the individuals involved lived personal lives beyond the intelligence matrix. By 5 April 1976, the operation moved toward execution. The trigger was the confirmation that a high-level militant courier was scheduled to meet the coordinator in Belgravia during the orchestra's planned concert at the Royal Albert Hall. The window was narrow, approximately 18 minutes in the first act, during which the townhouse's internal routines would be predictable, and the area's civilian movement would reach peak density, providing natural concealment. Every element of the mission depended on precise timing, controlled visibility, and the ability to return to the concert hall before any absence raised questions. The stakes were set, the clock was visible, and the roles, musician, technician, conductor, operative, were about to converge on a single evening. The architecture of Operation Silent Arya took shape over a 6-week period beginning on 10th of February 1976. Planners built the foundation on a simple rule. No part of the mission could alter the orchestra's legitimate activities. Every move had to fit inside what analysts called the performance envelope, the natural rhythm of rehearsals, load-ins, warm-ups, and concerts. Any action outside that envelope risked detection by British counterintelligence, venue staff, or the militants themselves. The infrastructure rested on 4 pillars. First, documentation and identity. Halevi's operative file used the internal designation Arya 47, recorded under Directive 3142B, which governed non-traditional access roles. The cover identity was not fabricated. It was an extension of his authentic life as a touring cellist. The conductor and 1 road technician received limited cover documentation referencing auxiliary logistics support, a phrase vague enough to avoid scrutiny, but specific enough to justify movement around restricted backstage areas. Second, equipment. Mossad introduced small, non-weaponized observation aids disguised as ordinary instrument accessories. One example was a modified peg case containing a miniature directional microphone with an effective range of 8 to 10 meters. Another was a stand bracket housing a passive optical filter, calibrated for low-light exterior visibility. No device had transmission capability. Recordings were collected later through physical retrieval. According to an internal technical review, this ensured that no actionable tool could be repurposed by hostile actors. Third, communications. The team relied on a queuing system layered into the orchestra's existing structure. 3 signals were used: a tempo adjustment during rehearsal, a baton angle shift on stage, and a backstage knock pattern matching the first 3 notes of a Haydn motif. None were noticeable to musicians outside the micro-cell. This analog system ensured that even if counterintelligence monitored electronic communications, nothing would appear unusual. Fourth, exfiltration routes. Analysts mapped the venue's rear corridors and external loading docks, identifying 2 paths that allowed rapid reintegration into the performance environment. One path moved through a service hallway behind the choir seats. The other passed the freight elevator and re-entered by the green room stairwell. A rehearsal report dated 23 March noted that the first route required 42 seconds of unobstructed movement. The second required 64 seconds. The planning consumed 41 days. By 23 March 1976, all technical elements were functional. Halevi had less than 3 weeks before the operation moved from preparation to contact. 30 April 1976. 14 toward 10. The orchestra arrived in London. As equipment trucks unloaded cases labeled with the LSO's standard 1976 tour markings, the internal cell conducted an initial survey of the Kensington-Belgravia corridor. Halevi walked the perimeter alone under the pretext of adjusting to humidity, a common concern for string players whose instruments reacted to weather changes. His real purpose was to assess lines of sight between the Royal Albert Hall's stage-left exit and the townhouse on Rutland Gate, identified as a probable meeting site. Over the next 72 hours, the team followed natural rehearsal schedules to maintain proximity. No extra movements were permitted. This constraint created the first complication. British police increased patrols in Belgravia in response to an unrelated threat against a foreign consulate. Increased foot presence meant that simply standing near the service entrance of a townhouse risked unwanted attention. 3 April, 1647. A patrol officer approached the road technician as he paused near a loading zone. The technician produced legitimate tour credentials and explained he was checking truck clearance for that evening's equipment move. The officer accepted the explanation and moved on. The incident lasted 41 seconds. In later analysis, Mossad concluded that a second interaction of that type could have compromised the mission. For the next 48 hours, the team avoided the townhouse entirely. What neither the British patrol nor the militants realized was that a shift was already underway. On 6 April, at 09:15, Halevi observed a man entering the Belgravia townhouse whom he recognized from a January security briefing in Tel Aviv. That briefing had included a blurred surveillance image taken in Vienna and labeled Associate of Courier Network. The match was not perfect, but it was close enough. This indirect contact confirmed that the townhouse remained active. The next micro-hook occurred later that day. What the militants inside did not know was that Halevi's vantage point, seen by them as a musician pacing before rehearsal, provided an ideal diagonal view into the townhouse's entrance corridor. The same musical persona that made him invisible to security also made him invisible to them. By 8 April, planners verified through intercepted scheduling chatter that the coordinator planned a late-evening meeting on 12th April, aligning exactly with the orchestra's performance across the street. This alignment was rare. Meetings of that level almost never occurred during evening hours when civilian movement was dense and unpredictable. Analysts concluded that the militants believed nighttime offered concealment. They were correct, just not in the way they assumed. Final positioning procedures began on 11th April, 24 hours before the concert. The team rehearsed their cue sequences twice. Everything centered on an 18-minute window between 19:42 and 20 hours. The vulnerability emerged during the arrival of the courier expected at 19:51. Patterns showed that deliveries to the townhouse triggered a brief lapse in internal protective routines. A guard stepped away from the corridor to greet the visitor. Interior doors remained unlatched, exterior sight lines briefly aligned. The intercept method, non-invasive, no physical entry, required precise timing. 12th of April, 15:30. 4.5 hours before the operation, Halevi tuned his cello in the dressing room. He checked endpin stability, string tension, and bow resin. All routine motions masking soft surveillance through the room's window, which overlooked the southern edge of Kensington Gardens. The conductor performed a similar check near the service dock, ostensibly monitoring acoustic balance tests. 3 hours before downbeat, the technician walked the alley adjacent to the stage left exit to confirm foot traffic patterns. At 17:02, he reported a minor deviation. A utilities van had stopped near the route typically used for reintegration. Planners adjusted accordingly, shifting the extraction path to the green room stairwell option. 12th April, 18:30. 90 minutes before the operation, the orchestra gathered for final sound checks. From this point forward, any unusual movement risked detection by musicians, staff, or British security. The internal cell went silent, communicating only through prearranged cues. As audiences began entering the hall, the team adopted full cover posture. No whispering, no deviations from normal performer behavior. Then came the final micro-hook. 300 meters away, inside the townhouse, the courier was already en route. Had he been early, the mission would have collapsed. But he was following routine patterns, and routine was the one variable Mossad could rely on. 12th of April 1976. 19:42. The concert began. The orchestra's first chord marked the operational timestamp. Audience members settled into their seats, ushers closed the doors. Backstage staff shifted into performance mode. This natural restriction of movement created a brief shield around the team. Anyone seen backstage during the opening minutes would be assumed to be part of normal stage operations. 19:44. Halevi moved quietly through the stage left corridor, cello in hand. Carrying the instrument was intentional. It allowed him to appear as though adjusting tuning or preparing for an offstage cue. He positioned himself near the service exit that provided a diagonal view of the Belgravia townhouse. The technician stationed himself along the alley beside the hall, monitoring pedestrian rhythms. A small, modified lighting case, model designation LC12, rested beside him. Inside was the directional microphone disguised as a cable spool. The conductor remained on stage. His baton shifts controlled timing. During execution, he would not look toward the operatives. Any visible communication risked detection by the musicians or stage crew. 19:48. The townhouse corridor lights activated. Halevi noted the change. It indicated interior movement preparing for the arrival of the expected courier. He checked the sight line through the passive optical filter mounted in what appeared to be a standard ebony endpin cap. Rain began to fall again, a complication that reduced visibility but masked street noise. According to an internal after-action note, this change benefited the operation. 1951. The courier arrived. He wore a dark overcoat and carried a narrow document bag. As predicted, the interior guard stepped forward to greet him. For approximately 70 seconds, the townhouse's vestibule remained unmonitored from the inside. That lapse was the mission's opportunity. The technician activated the directional microphone, angled toward the townhouse from a distance of roughly 22 meters. The device did not transmit. It recorded ambient signatures, footfall spacing, verbal tones, and brief fragments of conversation onto an internal spool no larger than a button. Combined with visual cues collected by Halevi, these signatures allowed analysts to confirm identity without breaching property or confronting anyone inside. The action lasted less than 1 minute. 19:54. The conductor triggered the withdrawal signal with a slight modification to the downbeat of the second movement. The deviation was too subtle for the audience and most musicians to notice, but clear enough for the internal cell. 19:55. Halevi withdrew from the service exit and re-entered the backstage corridor. He moved quickly but within the boundaries of plausible performer behavior. Head down, instrument cradled, steps controlled. The technician followed his own route, passing through the green room stairwell and rejoining the rear ensemble staging area. Extraction required 58 seconds for Halevi and 73 seconds for the technician. 19:58. By this point, both operatives were in their assigned positions. The conductor guided the orchestra into the final movement of the first act. No irregularities were observed by staff or British security. 20 worked. The first act ended. The audience applauded. On stage, the musicians bowed. Halevi stood in his place with the rest of the cello section, breathing evenly, gripping his bow with a steady right hand. No one watching from the hall could have guessed that 8 minutes earlier he had been collecting intelligence across the street. The entire execution phase, from downbeat to reintegration, lasted 18 minutes. There were no alarms, no confrontations, no physical entry into restricted premises. The mission's success depended on restraint, timing, and the natural camouflage provided by music. What the militants in Belgravia did not know was that their meeting, routine to them, would help dismantle a broader network days later. By the morning of 13th April 1976, British authorities had registered nothing unusual from the previous night's concert. Security logs for the Royal Albert Hall contained no anomalies beyond routine maintenance notes. Patrol reports from Belgravia described only light rain, standard foot traffic, and one late evening delivery, likely the courier entering the townhouse. In short, nothing alerted local services that an intelligence operation had occurred within view of their patrol grid. Mossad analysts began processing the collected material at 0210 that same morning. The acoustic signatures confirmed the courier's voice pattern with high confidence. Visual cues observed through Halevi's optical filter matched prior intelligence assessments of the coordinator's build, gait, and mannerisms. The combination produced a definitive identification, something traditional surveillance units had been unable to secure for over 14 months. Every lead traced through the intercept produced clean alignment with existing, partially verified intelligence streams. No contradictory elements emerged. According to one internal review, the coherence of the material suggested methodical operational discipline on the coordinator's part and an exploitable predictability. Within 48 hours, European partners were alerted through discreet diplomatic channels. Those channels provided limited detail, revealing only that actionable intelligence had been acquired through a trusted source. Operations executed in Vienna and Milan later that month disrupted the broader courier network. No arrests in London occurred. None were necessary. The militants themselves realized the breach only after a planned operation collapsed abroad on 21st April, prompting internal suspicion, but not enough clarity to reconstruct how the exposure occurred. Their speculation focused on intercepted communications, not cultural infiltration. Strategically, silent Arya achieved all primary objectives. The tactical target, confirmation of the coordinator's identity and schedule, was completed. Secondary benefits included mapping previously unknown associate links and narrowing future travel routes. These insights allowed European security agencies to anticipate movement patterns with far greater accuracy. Diplomatically, the operation produced controlled friction. British officials were never formally informed of any foreign activity within their jurisdiction. Israel's assessment, documented in a June 1976 policy memorandum, stated that disclosure would introduce unnecessary strain in a period of heightened Cold War sensitivities. While this omission avoided immediate fallout, it had consequences. By late summer, British counterintelligence began tightening scrutiny on cultural delegations, a shift historians later tied to unspecified concerns about foreign access. Operationally, the mission exposed a boundary in tradecraft, the delicate line between civilian spaces and state objectives. Future directives, specifically Directive 5 or 201B, restricted the use of civilian artists in intelligence roles unless extraordinary circumstances justified it. Human consequences persisted longest. For Halevi, music no longer offered pure refuge. Each subsequent performance revived memories of the mission's 18-minute window, producing a subtle tension that colleagues later recalled as a quiet distance. The technician left touring work the following year. The conductor continued performing but avoided all future intelligence contact. For the coordinator, the impact was indirect but heavy. His network contracted. Associates grew distrustful. Travel became restricted. While he remained active for several years, the fracture initiated by silent Arya never fully healed. In the calculation of state security, the assessment was clear. The benefits outweighed the costs. Whether that conclusion holds under moral scrutiny is less certain. The paradox at the heart of Operation Silent Arya remains unresolved. Was the use of civilian artists an act of necessary improvisation in the face of a growing militant threat? Or a step across a boundary designed to keep cultural spaces free from the weight of state conflict? Advocates of the operation argue that the intelligence gained prevented attacks and saved lives, a claim supported by the disrupted plots in Vienna and Milan. Critics counter that, once civilians, even willing ones, are drawn into the intelligence sphere, the distinction between performer and operative erodes, risking long-term damage to artistic trust. The truth depends less on the operation itself and more on how we interpret its implications. So here is the question for you. Should intelligence agencies ever enlist civilians, especially artists? for national security operations. Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you rethink the line between culture and covert action, share it so others can weigh in.